Clara Whitmore laid her rifle across the saddle before she touched the reins. Not because she expected trouble, because trouble had stopped announcing itself the year her husband died and left her holding a ranch, a mortgage, and a grief she hadn't finished processing. She had $47, 2 failing wells, and one plan left that wasn't surrender. She was riding to Red Mesa Ranch to buy horses. That was all this was. Business. She told herself that the whole 11 miles down. If this is your first time here, subscribe and ride with Clara to the very end. And drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Clara had the rifle out before the gate was even in front of her. Not because she'd heard anything threatening. Not because anyone had made a move in her direction. She pulled it from the saddle scabbard because her hands needed something to do, and because holding a rifle was, after 2 years of widowhood, one of the few things that still made her feel like she had some say in what happened next. She sat on sage at the edge of the Red Mesa property line and looked at what 12 years of another man's work had built. 3 barns all standing straight, white-painted fences, a real well house with a shingled roof, a main corral that didn't lean. The kind of ranch that didn't send apology letters to the bank or have conversations about extensions. The kind that just paid. She had asked around Laramie for 3 weeks before anyone gave her a name. She'd asked the feed store, the grain mill, the livery. 6 good quarter horses, trained ranch-ready, fair price. Finally, Pete Jacobs at the feed store had looked up from his ledger and said without any particular drama, as if it were just a name and not a stone dropped into standing water, Red Mesa Ranch. Nathaniel Callahan. She had made him repeat it. He had. She had stood there with a 50-pound sack of horse feed in her hands and felt something move through her that she did not have a polite word for. She had driven home. Sat at the kitchen table while Martha set biscuits in front of her that she didn't touch. Opened the ranch ledger, the one that didn't lie, had never lied, that told her in plain black ink that she had 8 weeks before the bank stopped being patient. Maybe 10, if summer stayed mild, and she cut the hands' wages, which she would not do, which meant 8. 8 weeks. 6 horses could change that. 6 trained ranch horses, sold to other ranches at a profit, could buy her through the fall. It was the only plan left that didn't involve selling land she had promised Robert she'd keep. So she had gone to bed. And she had gotten up before the sun. And she had saddled sage, laid the rifle across the saddle, and ridden south. Because Clara Whitmore did not let old pain make financial decisions for her. She told herself that 4 times on the ride over. She clicked her tongue, and sage moved through the gate, and that was when the first shot split the air. Clara pulled sage hard to the right before she'd even identified the sound. Her hand found the rifle grip. Her eyes swept the yard, not a gun pointed at her, but a man firing upward, trying to turn a wild black stallion that had broken clean through a corral rail and was running full out across the open ground. The horse was enormous. Pure black, no markings, 18 hands, if he was an inch, and completely beyond reason. His hooves threw up dust in great rolling waves as he came, and then Clara saw the boy. He was standing frozen near the water trough, with nowhere to go and no time to get there, maybe 19 years old, pale as new wood, and the stallion was bearing down on him at a dead run. Clara didn't think. She drove her heels in, and sage leaped forward. Clara cut across the yard at an angle not toward the stallion, but ahead of him, forcing him to turn or hit her. And sage knew this work was bred and trained for exactly this kind of decision. Clara leaned low, guided with her knees, pushed the stallion's shoulder hard with sage's weight, and the big black horse screamed and veered left away from the boy, out into the open field where he could run himself to nothing. The yard went still. Clara pulled sage around. The boy was still standing by the trough, both hands pressed flat to his chest, as if checking that his heart was still inside it. "You all right?" she called. "Yes, ma'am." His voice broke on the second word. Yes. "Go sit down before your knees do it for you." "Yes, ma'am." She heard boots behind her. She heard them before she heard anything else. A particular walk, unhurried and deliberate, the kind a man develops when he's learned that running toward trouble never made it smaller. She had not heard those boots in 11 years. She recognized them anyway. She kept her back to him for 2 full seconds. She used those 2 seconds the way she used every difficult moment to arrange her face to lock what needed locking to make sure nothing showed that she hadn't decided to show first. Then she turned Sage around. Nathaniel Callahan had not changed enough. That was the cruelest part of it. 11 years should have done more work on a man. He should have gone soft somewhere, or hollow, or bent in some way that made him easier to look at. Instead, he was broader across the shoulders than she remembered. 40 pounds of outdoor labor, heavier weathered the way wood gets when it's been in weather long enough to be stronger for it. There were lines at the corners of his eyes that were new. His jaw was harder. But the eyes were the same, dark gray, the color of a sky, deciding what it was going to do. Looking at her the way they had always looked at her, like she was the only thing in the yard worth looking at, and he already knew what that was going to cost him. "Clara," he said, just her name. Like 11 years were a courtesy he was choosing to skip. "Mr. Callahan," she said. Something moved through his expression. She catalogued it and moved on. "I didn't know you were coming," he started. "I'm here to buy horses," she said. 6. Your ad in the Laramie paper said you had quarter horses trained for ranch work. I need to see them agree on a price and arrange a pickup date." She kept her voice even, her back straight, her eyes level. "I came for horses, Mr. Callahan, not ghosts." He didn't flinch. She hadn't expected him to. Nate Callahan had never been a man who flinched from much of anything, which was one of the things she had loved about him once, and which had made his disappearance all the more impossible to explain. 6 horses, he said. 6. All right. One more second of that gray gaze, long enough to say something he wasn't saying out loud. Then he turned toward the east paddock. "Follow me." The boy from the yard. Eli Turner, she learned, had recovered enough color to trail behind them at a respectful distance. He introduced himself with his hat in his hands and told her he was much obliged for what she'd done. "Don't be obliged," she said. "Be more careful." "Yes, ma'am, I will." In the paddock, Nate showed her 6 horses, one at a time. They were good animals, genuinely good, not polished up to hide problems the way desperate sellers sometimes did. Clean legs, sound feet, easy to handle by a stranger's hands without throwing their heads. Clara worked each one methodically. She checked teeth, checked hooves, watched eyes and ears, ran her hands along legs and backs. Nate stood back and gave her room. He didn't crowd her, didn't explain or sell or make conversation. That was the thing she'd always hated about him, that he knew exactly when to be quiet. It had always felt to her like a kind of intimacy she hadn't consented to. 300 each, he said when she finished with the last roan. 250. 275. That's fair, and we both know it. She looked at him across the horse's back. 275 is fine, she said. She pulled out her receipt book. She wrote the purchase agreement in clean, precise handwriting. She was aware of his awareness of her, the slight tension in how he stood, the careful way he kept his eyes from staying on her face too long at a time. "I'll come back Friday," she said, "with my ranch hand and a trailer. I'll have them ready." She handed him the purchase paper. Their fingers did not touch. She was turning back toward Sage when he spoke. "Clara." She stopped walking. She did not turn around immediately. She made herself breathe once, evenly. "Mr. Callahan, we concluded a business transaction. We don't need to have anything further." "I know that." His voice was careful, in the way she remembered, measured, deliberate, like a man choosing every word the way you choose which stone to step on crossing a creek. "I know that. I just want you to know I'm sorry." "For what?" She kept her back to him. "Be specific." A pause. "For leaving," he said. She turned around then, slowly, on her own terms. "You didn't leave," she said. "Men who leave say goodbye. Men who leave write a word, send a message, give you something to hold on to. You vanished." She held his gaze without blinking. "That's a different thing." He didn't look away. "My father died in debt. The bank took the ranch in a week. I had nothing, not a dollar, not a horse, not a piece of land. Nothing to come back to you with. I didn't ask for land. I know. I didn't ask for money. I know that too. Then what were you protecting me from? Her voice did not rise. It never rose. Because from where I was standing, you made a decision about what I could handle without consulting me. And then you were gone, and I had to explain to every person in Laramie County why the man I... She stopped. Let one beat of silence pass. I had to rebuild without you, and I did. And I don't need your sorry. He was quiet. No, he said at last quietly. I don't reckon you do. Good. She turned to Sage. Friday then. She made it to the property line before Eli Turner caught up to her at a trot. Mrs. Whitmore. He pulled his horse up alongside Sage, hat in hand, color still a little off. Could I ask you something, ma'am? She looked at him. What is it? He turned his hat in his hands twice before speaking. Are you really coming back Friday? Because... He hesitated. I heard what you said to Mr. Callahan, and he's been different since Pete Jacobs mentioned your name to him last week. He gets up earlier, stays out later, works like I don't know how to describe it, like he's trying to deserve something. He looked at her carefully. I thought you should know that. Clara looked at this boy for a long, quiet moment. Eli, how long have you worked for Mr. Callahan? Coming on 2 years, ma'am. Is he a fair employer? The best I've ever had. Does he treat his horses well? Better than most men treat their families. Then you're fortunate to work for him. She gathered her reins. And the horses are sound and the price is fair. That's why I'm coming back Friday. That's the only reason. She touched her hat brim and rode south before he could see her face. The ranch was wrong before she got through the gate. Whitmore Ranch was never silent. There were always sounds, cattlemen, tools, horses. Silence meant her hands had found something to stand around and stare at instead of working, which in her experience meant something had gone badly wrong. She found them clustered near the main water trough. The trough was completely dry, not low, not down. Bone-dry mud cracked at the bottom, every last drop gone. Her foreman Tom Briggs came toward her with his hat in both hands, never a good sign, and his face in that particular arrangement men put on when they've been rehearsing bad news since morning. Both wells? She asked before he opened his mouth. He blinked. The west is gone completely. The secondary's down to a slow drip, ma'am. Enough for the house and maybe a quarter of the herd. The creek. Trickle. The drought's been building since May. I didn't want to alarm you until I was certain. He paused. There's still the spring. She went still in the saddle. The Callahan Spring. Runs through the east corner of your property before it crosses to Red Mesa. By rights, you've got a claim to access. Your husband had an arrangement with Henry Dawson, the man who owned Red Mesa before Callahan bought it. Verbal arrangement, she said. Yes, ma'am. Nothing on paper that I can find. She dismounted. She handed Sage's reins to the nearest hand without looking at him. She walked to the dry trough and stood over it and did the arithmetic. Without water, cattle died. Without cattle, no income. Without income, no mortgage payment. Without a mortgage payment, 6 weeks. Maybe 8. Not 10. She walked inside. Martha Bell was at the kitchen table with coffee ready and the expression she wore when she already knew everything and was waiting for you to catch up. You heard, Clara said. Tom told me before noon. Martha pushed the cup across the table. How were the horses? Good animals. And Callahan. Clara sat down, wrapped both hands around the cup, said nothing for a moment. He apologized, she said. Martha waited. Said his father died in debt. The bank took the ranch in a week. Said he had nothing to come back to me with. Martha's dark eyes were steady. And what did you tell him? That men who leave say goodbye. That's true. Martha folded her hands on the table. It's also not all of the truth, and I think you know that, Clara. Don't, Martha. I'm not starting anything. I'm only saying that the boy left in the worst week of his life with nothing in his pockets, and whether you can forgive him is entirely your affair. But hating him for being human won't keep the cattle alive." She paused. "You need the spring." "I need the spring," Clara confirmed. "Which means you need to go back. Which means I need to go back." She set down the cup. Outside, the wind moved through dry grass. Even the sound of it felt like warning. "He looked the same, Martha. He looked almost exactly the same, and I stood in his yard, and I said everything correctly, and I held myself together, and then his ranch hand chased me to the fence line to tell me Nate's been getting up earlier every morning since he heard my name." Martha said nothing. "I need the spring access," Clara said. "That is the only reason I am going back to Red Mesa Ranch." "All right." "It is." "I know, Clara." "Stop looking at me." Martha looked out the window instead. She sat up late that night with the land records spread across the kitchen table. Tom was right. No written agreement about the spring. Robert's handwriting in the household ledger spoke with Dawson re East Spring access understood between us. A date from 4 years prior. Nothing more. Robert Whitmore had been a good man. Steady, patient, fair. He had married a woman who still carried the shape of someone else in her chest, and he had never once spoken of it, and she had honored him with every faithful year. But he had not been careful with paperwork, and now she was the one paying the price. She needed the spring. She needed to go back to Red Mesa and have a conversation with Nate Callahan that was purely entirely about property access and nothing else. She closed the ledger, blew out the lamp, lay in the dark for a long time, and then, quiet as a thief, the thought arrived. He said he wrote letters. She had never received a single one. She turned that over once in the dark. Her father's house. Nate would have used her father's house. It was the last address he had for her when he left. Her father, who had spent 2 years telling her that Nathaniel Callahan was landless and directionless and beneath a girl with Clara's prospects. Her father, who had been dead 2 years now, and who had never, not once, not in any conversation in all the years between, mentioned a letter. 9 letters. That was what Nate had said. 9. She pressed the thought down flat, pushed it into the back of a drawer where she kept everything she couldn't afford to deal with yet. She went to sleep. She was back at Red Mesa on Wednesday, before Friday, before she'd said she'd come. She rode out at first light with the justification fully prepared. The spring situation couldn't wait. Every day cost her cattle water they didn't have. This was practical. This was business. This was the only reason. Nate was in the south paddock with Eli fixing a broken fence rail when she rode up. He saw her coming at a distance. Red Mesa's land was flat enough that you could see a rider for a quarter mile, and he stopped working. He handed Eli the hammer. He waited, and he did not look like a man who was surprised. He looked like a man who had been half expecting this and had been trying not to hope for it. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said. "Mr. Callahan." She dismounted without waiting to be asked. "I need to discuss the spring." Something settled in his expression, not disappointment, not quite. Something more complicated. "The spring," he repeated. "The one that runs through my east corner before it crosses to your land. My wells are failing. The creek is down to nothing. My cattle need water, and I need access to that spring before I lose animals I can't replace." She stood straight and looked at him directly. "My husband had a verbal agreement with Henry Dawson. Nothing on paper. I'm asking you to honor it." He looked at her for a beat, then he turned his head. "Eli, go check the water level in the north barn." "Sir." "Now please." Eli went. Nate looked back at her. "What kind of access are you asking for?" "My cattle reach the spring from the east gate. Your cattle have first right. I'm not asking for anything your animals require. I'm asking for what remains." She kept her voice businesslike, clean. "I'm not here to take what's yours. I never was." That landed, and she let it. "You're not asking for charity," he said. "No, I'm asking for a neighbor agreement, and I'm offering something in return." She reached inside her coat and produced a folded paper. "My east road runs past your lower field. You've been riding 2 miles around to reach your winter pasture every season. I'll give you legal right-of-way across that road in writing signed and filed with the county clerk. In exchange for spring access." She held the paper out. Equal trade. He didn't take it right away. He looked at her face, really looked the way he used to, past the surface of things, in a way that had always made her feel like he was reading something she hadn't written yet. "You practiced this," he said. "I prepared it. That is not the same thing." "No," he agreed. "I don't reckon it is." He took the paper. Read it fully carefully, the same way he'd always read everything, the same way she remembered, slowly and without apology for taking the time. She had found that maddening once. She found it steadying now, in a way she didn't examine. He refolded the paper. "I'll have my attorney draw both agreements," he said. "Your spring access and my road right-of-way. Equal terms, legal, filed proper." "Agreed, Clara." He held her gaze with an evenness that cost him something. She could see it costing him. "The letters. I sent 9 of them, all to your father's address. That was the last one I had for you." The ground shifted slightly beneath her boots. "My father's address," she said. Yes. Her father's house. Her father, who had pulled her aside at 19 and told her that Nathaniel Callahan was a fine-looking boy with an empty future, and that she was worth considerably more than empty. Her father, who had held every letter sent to that house. Her father, who was 2 years in the ground. "I'll wait for your attorney's paperwork," she said. Her voice was steady. Her voice was always steady when it needed to be. "Thank you for agreeing to work with me, Mr. Callahan. We were always better at working together than anything else," he said quietly. She didn't answer that. She mounted. Sage settled her hat against the white Wyoming sun and rode south at an even pace. She held her face still until the Red Mesa gate was behind her and the open road was in front of her. Then, alone on that long flat stretch of summer road, with only the sky watching, Clara Whitmore let herself feel the full weight of 9 letters she had never received and what they might have changed. She rode the whole 11 miles home, carrying that weight, and she didn't put it down once. Martha Bell was still awake when Clara got home. She was sitting at the kitchen table, with a lamp burning low and her hands folded in her lap, and she had the look she always got when she'd been thinking hard about something she wasn't sure she had the right to say. Clara had seen that look 100 times in 2 years of widowhood. She had learned to sit down and wait it out, because Martha always got to it eventually. Clara hung her hat, sat down, poured herself the last of the cold coffee. Martha watched her. "He said 9 letters, Clara said. She hadn't planned to say it. It came out anyway. "To my father's address." Martha's hands tightened in her lap. "Martha." "Clara. Did you know?" "No." Martha said it clean and without hesitation. "Not while your father was alive. I swear to you on that." "But—" Martha looked at her for a long moment, the kind of look that carries weight it hasn't released yet. "After your father passed," she said carefully, "when we were clearing the house, before you moved back in." She stopped, started again. "I found something behind the false bottom of his desk drawer. I thought it was financial papers at first. I was going to bring them to you." She unfolded her hands and folded them again. "It was a letter, Clara. 1 letter, unopened, postmarked Colorado, 1871. The kitchen went very quiet. 1871, Clara said. "Yes. That was the 2nd year after he left." "Yes." Clara set down the coffee cup, set it down slowly with both hands, because she did not trust what her hands would do if she didn't give them a direction. "Where is it now?" Martha stood without a word, went to the pantry, came back with a small tin box that Clara had never seen before. She set it on the table between them. "I kept it," Martha said. "I didn't know if I was right to. I've been arguing with myself about it for 8 months." Her voice was steady, but her eyes weren't. "I'm sorry I didn't bring it to you sooner." Clara looked at the tin. She looked at it for a long time without touching it. The lamp threw soft light across the kitchen, and outside the night was absolutely still, and somewhere down the road, a coyote was calling at nothing. She picked up the tin, opened it. The envelope inside was old and soft at the edges. The ink slightly faded, but the handwriting was unmistakable. She had been 19 the first time she'd seen that handwriting. She had read every word the man had ever written her so many times that the letters were still stored somewhere behind her eyes. She did not open it tonight. She closed the tin, set it back on the table. "He kept it," she said, not angry, not yet, just saying the shape of the thing. "My father kept it." "Your father wanted something specific for you," Martha said quietly. "And Nate Callahan, wasn't it?" "No." Clara pushed back from the table. "He wasn't." She stood, picked up the tin. "I'm going to bed." "Clara." She stopped in the doorway. "Opening that letter," Martha said, "is not going to change what needs to be done tomorrow or the day after. The wells are still dry. The cattle still need water. The spring agreement still needs to be signed. I know that. I just want to make sure you know it. Martha." Clara looked at her over her shoulder. "I have known what needed to be done every single morning for 11 years. That hasn't changed." She paused. "Good night." She went to her room, set the tin on the nightstand, got into bed without opening it, lay awake for 2 hours, staring at it in the dark. Then she opened the letter. The attorney's paperwork came back by Friday, same day she came to collect the horses. Nate had moved faster than she'd expected, and the documents were clean and thorough. Both agreements written in clear, plain language, no traps in the margins, nothing hiding between the lines. She signed, he signed, Eli witnessed. They shook hands at the gate like two people who had agreed on the price of lumber. "Your cattle can start using the east access Monday," Nate said. "I'll have my man clear the path." "I appreciate it. Clara." She was already turning sage. "Mr. Callahan, we said what we needed to say Wednesday. The papers are signed. Let's let the work speak." He was quiet for a beat. "That's fair," he said. "I'll let it speak." She rode home with 6 horses trailing behind her in a line, and Tom Briggs keeping them steady on the right, and she told herself that the tightness across her chest was just the summer heat, and she halfway believed it. Monday came in hot and still. Tom opened the east gate at first light, and Clara stood at the fence watching her cattle move through toward the spring counting heads, watching for anything wrong. It went smoothly. The cattle found water. They drank long and slow, the way animals drink when they haven't had enough, and Clara watched them and let out a breath she'd been holding since Wednesday. Tom came up beside her. "Good water," he said. "Strong flow even this dry. Keep a count every morning," she said. "I don't want to use a drop more than the agreement allows." "Yes, ma'am." She was heading back to the house when she saw him, a rider sitting still on a big bay horse at the far south fence line. Just sitting, watching. Not Nate, she'd know Nate at any distance, and not anyone from Red Mesa that she recognized. The rider didn't move, just watched her cattle come through, and watched Clara, and then turned the bay horse south and rode away at a slow, unhurried pace that said he hadn't been in a hurry and he wasn't leaving because anyone made him. "Tom," she said. "I saw him." "You know him." Tom was quiet for a second. "Maddox's man," he said. "Fellow named Holt. Rides for the Double M." Clara looked at the space where the rider had been. "Why is Grant Maddox sending men to watch my cattle water?" "I don't know, ma'am." Tom paused. "But I don't reckon it's because he's happy about it." She filed that away and went inside. The storm came Thursday. It built all day from the west, the sky going from white to yellow, to the specific green-gray color that meant serious business. Clara was at Red Mesa returning Nate's signed copy of the road agreement when the first real wind hit, and by the time she realized how fast it was moving, it was already too late to ride home ahead of it. "Come inside," Nate said. He wasn't asking. "I can make it." The sky opened. Not rain first wind, a wall of it, the kind that hits you sideways and makes your horse stumble. Sage went sideways 2 steps, and Clara pulled her hard, and Nate was already at her bridle. "Get inside, Clara." She got inside. The barn was close and warm and loud, with rain hammering the roof, and the horses shifting in their stalls with the nervous energy animals get before a serious storm. Eli was already in there, had clearly been sheltering for 20 minutes, and he looked simultaneously relieved to have company, and very aware that the company was complicated. "How long?" Clara asked. Nate looked at the barn wall as if he could see through it. 2 hours. Maybe 3. She thought about her cattle near the spring in this rain. She thought about Tom, who was capable and steady and had handled worse. She thought about the tin box still sitting on her nightstand with the letter back inside it, because she had read it and folded it back up and not decided yet what to do with what it said. She thought 2 hours in a barn with Nathaniel Callahan. "Eli," Nate said, "go check the water barrels in the back. Take your time." Eli looked between them. He was a smart boy, Clara had noticed. Smart enough to go. The barn was quieter without him. Clara sat down on a hay bale and kept her back straight and her face arranged. Nate sat down across from her and leaned his forearms on his knees and looked at the floor for a moment before he looked up. "You read it," he said. She didn't ask how he knew. "Yes. And it was a letter." She kept her voice level. "You told me you missed me. You told me your father had died. You told me you were working in Colorado and you'd have something to come back to me with inside of 2 years. She paused. "You asked me to wait." "I did. I didn't receive it. I know. I married Robert Whitmore 14 months later." Something moved through his face and settled again. "I know that too. He was a good man, Nate. He was patient with me in ways most men wouldn't have been, and he didn't deserve a wife who spent the first year of her marriage looking out windows." She stopped. "I want to be clear that I am not blaming you for my marriage or for Robert. That was my life, and I lived it, and I don't regret what I built with him. I'm not asking you to, but I need you to understand that one letter or 9 or 90 doesn't rewrite what happened. It explains it. Those are different things." He looked at her steadily. "What do you need from me, Clara?" "Nothing," she said. "We have a business agreement. I need it to stay a business agreement. And if I can't manage that—" The wind hit the barn wall hard enough to make the structure shudder. The horses threw their heads. Clara didn't move. "Then that's your problem to manage," she said, "not mine." He was quiet for a long moment, and then quietly, "I never stopped. That's the part I won't lie about. I worked Colorado, then Utah, then Montana, and I never stopped thinking about what I should have done differently. And when I came back and heard you'd married—" He stopped, started again. "I bought Red Mesa because it was the best land I could find, and I told myself that was the only reason." Clara looked at him across the hay-dusty air of that barn, with the rain thundering on the roof. "Was it?" she asked. His jaw tightened. "No," he said, "it wasn't." Silence. Then Clara said very quietly, "Nate, don't. I'm not doing anything. You're being honest, and I need you to stop." He almost smiled. It didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. "That's new. You used to say I wasn't honest enough." "I was 22. I've revised my preferences." He did laugh then, short and low, and it was so close to the sound she remembered that something shifted in her chest without her permission. She stood up, moved to the nearest stall, and put her hands on the top rail because she needed something solid under her hands. "Tell me about the ranch," she said. "Tell me how you got Red Mesa." He understood what she was doing. He let her do it. He talked. She listened. He told her about Montana first, 4 years of working other men's herds, saving every dollar, sleeping in bunkhouses and tack rooms, and once in a ditch during a November blizzard. Then Utah, where a rancher named Greer had trusted him with a remuda of 50 horses and taught him what he hadn't known about training. Then the slow accumulation of enough to mean something. Then Red Mesa, which he'd bought from Henry Dawson 3 years back after Dawson's health failed and his children wanted city money over ranch land. Dawson mentioned your husband, Nate said. When we were negotiating, said the Whitmore Ranch was good neighbors. Robert was, Clara said. He was a good neighbor to everyone. He was good to you. She turned to look at him. That is not a question you've earned the right to ask. He tipped his head. Fair enough. Eli came back from his water barrels 15 minutes later, looking like a boy who had counted every barrel twice and still come back too soon. He took one look at the two of them, Clara at the stall, Nate on the hay bale, several feet of charged air between them, and went to check on something in the other direction without being asked. Smart boy. The storm broke just past dark. Clara rode home with a lantern borrowed from Nate's barn, and Tom Briggs meeting her at the property line because he'd had the sense to come looking when she didn't return by supper. He didn't say anything about the hour or where she'd been. Tom Briggs was 60 years old and had excellent judgment about which questions to ask. She was at the house, boots off, sitting at the kitchen table with Martha's reheated stew in front of her, when Martha set down a piece of paper beside the bowl. This came while you were at Red Mesa, Martha said. Delivered by hand. One of the Dawson boys brought it from town. Clara looked at the paper. It was a notice from the Laramie County Social Council, the informal organization of ranch wives and business owners that regulated without any legal authority who was respectable and who wasn't in this particular corner of Wyoming. She had been a member in good standing for 2 years since Robert's death. The notice informed her that her membership was under review. Under review, Clara said aloud. Yes. On what grounds? Martha pressed her lips together. The notice doesn't say. But Hazel Drummond was at the dry goods store today. She told Sarah Tipton, who told the Dawson boy, who told me. She paused. She said Clara Whitmore's been spending time alone at Red Mesa Ranch with an unmarried man, and it doesn't look right for a widow who's only been out of mourning 14 months. Clara read the notice again. Then she set it face down on the table. Hazel Drummond's husband owes Grant Maddox money, she said. Has for 3 years. Martha said nothing. This isn't about my reputation. Clara picked up her fork. This is about Maddox. He's using the social council to pressure me. He wants me uncomfortable, embarrassed, and isolated. She ate a bite of stew. He's smarter than I gave him credit for. What are you going to do? Go to the social council meeting Friday, she said. Look every one of those women in the eye and behave as though I have nothing to be ashamed of. Because I don't. Martha sat down across from her. Clara, you know how these things go. Once the rumor has legs, I know exactly how it goes. I watched it happen to Vera Klein when she tried to keep her farm after her husband died. I watched those women circle her until she sold to Maddox man for half the land's worth. Clara met Martha's eyes. That is not going to happen to me. And Callahan. Mr. Callahan is my business partner in a signed legal agreement. That is the entirety of our relationship. Martha looked at her with the precision of a woman who had known Clara since she was 20 years old and who had absolutely no intention of arguing with her at this particular moment. Of course, Martha said. Clara finished her stew, chag. She went to the social council meeting. The hall was fuller than usual, which told her the gossip had been working hard all week. She walked in wearing her best dress, which was 3 years old, and pressed clean, and she held her chin at exactly the angle she'd inherited from her father, the one that said she was listening and not particularly moved by what she was hearing. Hazel Drummond was near the front. She had the careful smile of a woman who had decided on something and was enjoying the decision. Clara, she said, we were so worried when we heard about your situation. What situation is that, Hazel? Clara said pleasantly. Well, a widow woman out at a bachelor's property alone in a storm. Hazel's smile stayed exactly in place. People talk, dear. It isn't fair, but they do. People talk about what they're given, Clara said. I went to Red Mesa Ranch to complete a legal business transaction that is on file with the county clerk. The storm was an act of God, not a social arrangement. She looked at Hazel levelly. Is there something specific you'd like to ask me, because I find I prefer direct questions to charitable concern? The room had gone very quiet. Hazel's smile flickered. I only meant, I know what you meant. Clara looked around the room slowly at every face, every woman there. Some of them looked away. Some didn't. I am a widow who owns land and cattle and has a mortgage due by November. Every decision I make is about keeping that ranch alive. If that makes me a subject of interest, I can live with that. She let a beat of silence pass. What I cannot live with is the suggestion that a woman alone should be helpless enough to satisfy everyone's comfort. Dead quiet. Then Margaret Halley, who was 63 and had been a widow for 20 years and owned more land than anyone in the room, except possibly Clara, cleared her throat. The membership review, Margaret said in the tone of a woman closing a door, is withdrawn. I'll note that in the records. She looked at Hazel Drummond without warmth. Shall we move to the agenda? The meeting moved to the agenda. Clara sat through all of it. She drank the offered tea. She spoke when spoken to. She did not leave early. On the way out, Margaret Halley took her elbow briefly and said very quietly, Maddox pushed Hazel to do that. Her husband's debt. She released Clara's arm. Watch yourself, dear. That man doesn't fight fair. I know, Clara said. I'm learning. She was still turning that over on the ride home when she heard the horse coming up fast from the south. Nate pulled his horse up alongside Sage with the controlled urgency of a man who had information and had been riding hard to deliver it. I was coming to find you, he said. I can see that. She kept Sage moving. Ride with me and talk. He fell in beside her. Did you know Maddox came to see me last month before you ever came to Red Mesa? She looked at him sharply. About what? The spring. Nate's voice was flat and precise. He made me an offer. Said he wanted to buy the spring rights, not the land, just the water rights. Said he'd pay 3 times what they're worth on paper. He paused. I said no. Why? Because a man who wants to own water in a drought year isn't buying water. He's buying power over every ranch in this valley. He met her eyes. I turned him down, and I didn't think much more about it. Until this week, when Holt started showing up on fence lines and Hazel Drummond started running her mouth about you. Clara absorbed this. Her mind was moving fast, pulling threads. He wants the spring specifically, she said. Your spring. The one that feeds into my east corner. It's the only water source in this valley that doesn't depend on the creek or the aquifer. It runs year-round. If Maddox controls it, he controls the valley. Clara said it quietly. Every dry year, every drought, every rancher who needs water either pays him or sells to him. She felt something cold settle in her chest. He's not targeting us because of gossip, Nate. The gossip is just noise. He's targeting us because the spring sits between our 2 properties and our cooperation makes us impossible to divide. Yes, Nate said. That's what I think too. They rode in silence for a moment. The summer dark was coming in from the east, soft and warm, and somewhere above them, the first stars were appearing. How long has he been planning this? She asked. Long enough to know exactly where to push, Nate said. The social council, the bank, your reputation, my. He paused. He knows what we are to each other, or what we were. We are business partners, Clara said. Clara, we are business partners, she said again firmly, with a mutual problem. And if we approach this like business partners, we stand a better chance than if we let Grant Maddox reframe us as something he can use against us. Nate was quiet for several seconds. All right, he said. Business partners. With a common enemy and a signed legal agreement and a spring he's not going to get his hands on. All right. Something shifted in his voice. What do you want to do? She had already been thinking about this for the last mile. I want every piece of paper that documents that spring. Your deed, the survey maps, the water rights filing if there is one. I want to know exactly what Maddox can legally challenge and what he can't. She looked at him. And I want to talk to the other ranchers in this valley who've had dealings with Maddox, because I told the social council tonight that if he can take water from a widow, he can take land from anyone. She paused. I want to find out if anyone's ready to say that out loud. Nate looked at her with an expression she didn't have a clean category for. You've been thinking about this for a while, he said. I've been thinking about it since I saw his man watching my cattle at the spring Monday morning. She met his eyes. I grew up watching my father let men like Maddox win because he thought the rules protected decent people. They don't. The rules protect whoever is willing to use them. She straightened in the saddle. I'm willing. So am I, Nate said. Good. She turned Sage toward the Whitmore gate. I'll send word tomorrow. Bring whatever papers you have on the spring. Clara. His voice stopped her at the gate. For what it's worth, I think Robert Whitmore was a lucky man. She sat very still for a moment. The stars were coming in steadily now, the whole wide Wyoming sky opening up overhead. Good night, Mr. Callahan, she said. She rode through the gate. She did not look back, but she was aware in the specific way she was always aware of him that he sat there watching until the dark took her. She found Tom Briggs in the equipment shed at first light the next morning, sharpening blades with the systematic focus of a man who is thinking hard about something other than blades. Tom, she said, how many ranchers in this valley have had water trouble in the last 2 years? Tom set down the sharpening stone. He thought about it for a long moment. Henderson's lost access to the North Creek 2 summers back. Maddox bought that access from the Petersons upstream. Legally. Tom picking up the stone again. Billings sold his east quarter to Maddox last fall, said the bank pressure was too much. Maddox's man had been running cattle across his fence lines for a year before that, wearing the land down, scaring off the water. And the Billings family said nothing publicly. Jim Billings has 3 children and no other income. Tom looked at her steadily. People stay quiet when they're scared, Mrs. Whitmore. You know that. I do. She leaned against the shed frame. I want you to ride out to the Henderson place today. Not official, not with any message from me. Just neighbor talk. Ask Walt Henderson how he's getting on, and listen to what he says about Maddox. Yes, ma'am. She started toward the house, then stopped. Turned back. Tom, has Maddox's man Holt been back on the fence line? Tom met her eyes. Every morning since Monday, he said. Dawn, same spot. Clara nodded slowly. Leave him alone, she said. Let him look. I want Maddox to think we haven't noticed. She went inside. She sat at the kitchen table with the land records and the spring survey papers and her father's old map of the valley spread out in front of her. She traced the water table with her finger, the creek that was failing her 2 dead wells, the Red Mesa spring that ran clean and steady no matter the season. She traced the property lines. She found the narrow corridor of land where the spring crossed from Red Mesa into her east corner. Then she found something she hadn't noticed before, a notation in her husband's map in his careful hand. Survey dispute unresolved, see Dawson File 1868. She sat up straight. She pulled out every document from Robert's ranch files and sorted through them until she found a folder marked simply Water East. Inside was a letter from Henry Dawson, the previous owner of Red Mesa, dated 1868, addressed to Robert Whitmore. She read it twice. The spring, according to a county survey in 1867, did not entirely cross into Red Mesa. A portion of the spring's source, the actual geological point of origin, sat on a strip of land that had been in legal dispute between Dawson and the county for 3 years. The dispute had never been formally resolved. Dawson had simply stopped pushing, and the county had let it sit, which meant the spring's legal ownership was not as clear as anyone, including Nate, had assumed, which meant Grant Maddox, with his money and his lawyers, could challenge that ownership in court, which meant they had far less time than she'd thought. She was on her horse and riding for Red Mesa before she'd finished the last line of the letter. Nate read the Dawson letter standing up, both hands holding the paper, his face doing the thing it did when he was working through something serious, very still, very focused. The particular quiet of a man who is not reacting until he understands. When he finished, he set the paper down on the fence rail between them. "He knows," Nate said. "Maddox. He knows about the survey dispute. That's why he moved now," Clara said. "This year. Not 2 years ago, not next year. The drought made the water worth fighting for, and somebody told him about the unresolved survey. If he files a legal challenge and gets a sympathetic judge, he controls the spring," Clara said. "Before winter." Nate looked at her. The summer light was flat and hard and made everything sharp. "How long do we have?" "If he files immediately, 4 weeks before a hearing. Maybe 6. She held his gaze. "We need to find that original 1867 survey. The actual county document, not Dawson's copy. If the boundary was drawn correctly and Maddox is reading it wrong, we can prove it. If the boundary was never officially established." She stopped. "We fight on the ground instead of in court," Nate said quietly. "We fight everywhere," she said. "And we need other people fighting with us because 2 ranchers and a legal dispute is a private matter. 2 ranchers and every water-pressured family in this valley is something else." Nate's eyes were steady on her. "You've been building this in your head since yesterday." "Since Monday morning," she said. "Since I saw Holt at my fence line." He picked up the Dawson letter. "I'll ride to the county records office today. I'll find the 1867 survey. Take Eli. Don't go alone. I want a witness to whatever you find." She turned to go. "Clara?" His voice was quiet. She stopped. "When this is over, when we've dealt with Maddox and the spring and the lawyers and the rest of it, I want to have a different conversation with you. One that isn't about business." She didn't turn around. "Ask me again when it's over," she said, "if you still want to." She got on her horse. She rode south. And behind her she heard him say, barely above the sound of the summer wind, "I'll still want to." She rode harder, but she didn't deny it. Nate came back from the county records office on a Friday afternoon with Eli beside him, and a look on his face that Clara had not seen before. Not anger, not worry. Something quieter and more dangerous than either the expression of a man who has discovered that the problem is bigger than he thought, and has spent the ride home deciding what to do about it. Clara met them at the gate. "Tell me," she said. Nate swung down from his horse. He reached inside his coat and produced a folded paper, a copy of the 1867 survey, the county's official document. He handed it to her without a word. She opened it, studied it, found the boundary line where the spring's origin sat, found the notation in the margin. Then she saw what he'd seen. "This has been changed," she said. "Yes." She looked up at him. "The boundary marker notation. This ink is newer than the rest of the document. Someone went into the county records and altered the margin notation to show the spring origin fully inside Red Mesa's boundary." She looked at it again. "If this version holds, Maddox can't claim the spring at all. It's clearly Callahan land. But he's going to challenge the Red Mesa deed itself. He's going to argue my deed is invalid," Nate said. "That the land was misrepresented at sale. If Red Mesa's boundary is wrong, the deed is wrong. And if the deed is wrong, he can file for the land itself." Clara folded the paper. Not just the spring, the whole ranch. Eli, who had been standing back at a respectful distance, took one step forward. "Mr. Callahan," he said carefully. "When we were at the records office, the clerk, the young one, Peterson, he looked nervous when we asked for the 1867 file, like he'd been expecting someone to come for it." Nate looked at him. "Say the rest of it." "When you went to use the facilities, I asked Peterson how long ago the file had last been pulled. He said 3 weeks. Eli paused, and then he stopped talking and went back to his desk real fast. Clara and Nate looked at each other. 3 weeks ago, Clara said. Just before Maddox came to you with his offer. He altered the document, then made me the offer thinking I'd sell for 3 times value rather than fight, Nate said. And when I didn't, he started on me. Clara handed the survey copy back to him. He needed to separate us. If you sold and I was isolated, he'd have the spring and access to both properties. She turned toward the house. We need the original territorial survey from Cheyenne, the state records. Those can't have been altered, they're in the capital. I can ride to Cheyenne? Eli said immediately. You'll go by train, Clara said. Faster. Take Tom Briggs with you and take my letter of authorization. I'll write it tonight. She was already moving. And Eli, tell no one where you're going or why. Not even the station master. Buy the tickets with cash. Eli nodded straight-backed and serious in the way young men get when they realize they've been handed something that matters. Yes, ma'am. Go pack, she said. Both of you. Train leaves at 6 tomorrow morning. Tom came back from this Henderson place that same evening with his hat in his hands and a report that was the first genuinely good news she'd had in a week. Walt Henderson was angry. Had been angry for 2 years. Had kept quiet because Maddox held his neighbor Peterson's debt, and Peterson's land sat between Henderson's water access and the main creek, and if Peterson sold to Maddox, Henderson was landlocked. He'll talk, Tom said. He said if there's a public forum, something where he isn't the only one speaking, he'll say what he knows. What does he know? That Maddox's man, Holt, destroyed a fence post on his property line in the spring of '72 and then offered to sell him a water security arrangement 2 days later. Henderson told him no. Spent the next year with cut fences and poisoned troughs. Tom paused. He's got records, dates, damage, repair costs. He kept everything. Clara sat with that for a moment. Who else in this valley has a story like his? Tom thought about it. Jim Billings might talk now that he's already sold. He's got nothing left to lose. The widow Crane up on the North Fork had trouble with her creek access last fall. She sold her water rights to Maddox's man for $200 because she didn't know what else to do. He paused. She knows now. Can you reach them quietly? Yes, ma'am. Do it, she said. We have maybe 3 weeks before Maddox makes his legal move. I want everyone who has a story to be ready to tell it before a room full of witnesses. Tom nodded. He was almost out the door when he stopped. Mrs. Whitmore, what you're building here, gathering people, collecting evidence, going public, Maddox is going to see it coming. I know. And when he does, he's going to move fast to shut it down. I know that too, she said. That's why we're moving faster. Chahue. She was right. Maddox moved on a Sunday, which was deliberate a day, when courts were closed. Attorneys were hard to reach, and legal authority was slow to mobilize. Clara found out about it at dawn Monday, when her East Gate hand, a 16-year-old boy named Jesse, came riding up to the house at a dead run, with his face white, and his voice still finding its register. Mrs. Whitmore, the spring. He pulled his horse up hard. There's men out there. Maddox's men. They put up a fence across the east corridor last night, wire and post, and there's a sign on it. Clara was out the door in 60 seconds. Nate was already at the spring when she arrived. He'd seen the same fence from his side, and he was standing in front of it with his jaw set and his hand near his hip, in the way she recognized from every man she'd ever seen who was seriously considering making a bad decision. Don't, she said before she even got fully off stage. Clara, do not touch that fence. She dismounted and stood between him and the wire. That's exactly what he wants. He wants you to tear it down. He wants you to put a hand on his men. He wants the sheriff here for destruction of property and assault, and he wants it to be your name on the report. Nate looked at her. His eyes were storm gray and furious. He put a fence across your water. He put a fence across water that is legally disputed, she said, which means tearing it down is legally destruction of another man's property until we can prove otherwise. She held his gaze. Nate, listen to me. Look at me. He looked at her. He is trying to make you angry enough to make a mistake. He has done this before with Henderson, with Billings, with the widow Crane. He pressures until someone swings first, and then the law finishes the job for him. She kept her voice steady. We are not going to swing first. He breathed out. Once hard. His hand moved away from his hip. "Then what?" he said. "We stand here and watch him take it." "We stand here," she said, "and we read the sign." The sign was printed on a board in clean professional lettering. It cited a preliminary court order, Judge Harold Birch, Laramie County, granting temporary possession of the contested spring water rights to the Double M Ranch, pending formal survey resolution. Dated Friday. Signed and stamped. Clara read it twice. "He had this planned before we knew about the altered survey," she said. "He filed for the preliminary order while Eli was still in Cheyenne." She looked at Nate. "He has a judge." "Birch," Nate said. "Harold Birch." Something moved in his face. Birch's son borrowed $40,000 from Maddox's bank operation 6 months ago. Clara looked at him. "I heard it at the feed store," Nate said. "Didn't think much of it at the time." "Maddox has a judge in debt to him," she said quietly. "So any challenge we file goes to a man who owes Maddox his son's financial future." She turned away from the fence. All right. He stared at her. "Clara, he's fenced the spring. And we are going to unfence it," she said. "Legally. Through the Cattlemen's Association meeting next Thursday, where every rancher in this valley is going to hear what Grant Maddox has been doing for 3 years. She put her foot in the stirrup. "Go back to your ranch, stay off the fence, and send word to your attorney today. I want every legal challenge to that preliminary order filed before close of business tomorrow." "Clara," she paused. "He's going to be at that meeting," Nate said. "Maddox, he knows it's coming. He'll have his own version ready." "Good," she said. "I want him there." She rode home. Her attorney, a wiry, cautious man named Daniel Pruitt, met her at the Whitmore kitchen table that afternoon and told her with the careful neutrality of a lawyer who doesn't want to lie but doesn't want to alarm that the preliminary order was going to be difficult to overturn without the original territorial survey. "How difficult?" she asked. "With Birch on the bench." He set down his pen. "Difficult enough that I'd recommend settling. Maddox's man approached me last week. Maddox's man approached my attorney." She kept her voice even. "About settling." Pruitt had the grace to look uncomfortable. He offered what he called a fair arrangement. You'd cede the spring access claim in exchange for a cash payment and a guarantee of water access through a Maddox-controlled pipe system. "No. Clara. No." She stood up from the table. "Daniel, has Maddox approached every attorney in this county?" Pruitt was quiet for exactly 1 second too long. "File the challenges," she said. "Everyone we have. And if you're not able to do that without Maddox's voice in your ear, tell me now so I can find someone who can." He straightened. Something in him settled. "I'll file them," he said. "I'll file all of them." "Today." "Today," he said. "Yes." Eli came back from Cheyenne on Wednesday evening, 12 hours before the cattlemen's meeting with Tom Briggs and a leather satchel, and the look of a young man who has done something that mattered and knows it. He laid the territorial survey on the kitchen table. Clara, Nate, Martha, and Tom stood around it. The original 1867 territorial document showed the boundary clearly, precisely, and without the altered margin notation. The spring's origin point sat in a strip of land designated as shared access. Neither Red Mesa nor Whitmore Ranch held exclusive rights. It was common water, which meant it could not be privately claimed by either party, and certainly not by Grant Maddox. But more importantly, the document showed something else. A second notation in the original surveyor's hand noted that the strip containing the spring's origin was recorded as Community Water Access registered under the Territorial Water Rights Act of 1864, which predated every deed in the valley, including Maddox's. "He can't own it," Nate said. He said it quietly, like a man reading something he wants to make sure he's reading right. "He can't own community water. The Territorial Act protects it from private acquisition." "Not unless the territorial registration was abandoned," Clara said. "If no active claim has been filed under the 1864 Act in the last 10 years. She stopped, read the notation again. "Tom, Is there any record of a Water Rights Act filing in this county in the last decade? Tom shook his head slowly. Not that I know of. Clara looked up. Then we file one. Tonight. Eli, can you get to the county clerk's office before 8? The clerk closes at 7. Can you get there before 7? Eli was already reaching for his hat. Yes, ma'am. Take this document. File a community water access claim under the Territorial Water Rights Act of 1864 for the spring and the surrounding strip. Get it stamped and dated and get the receipt. She looked at him hard. Do not let Peterson touch the paperwork. Ask for the senior clerk. Eli was out the door before she finished the sentence. Nate looked at her across the table. If that claim files tonight, he said slowly, Maddox's preliminary order applies to land he can't legally claim. Birch's order applies to private ownership of that water, she said. Community water under the 1864 Act is outside private ownership jurisdiction. His order is void the moment our filing is stamped. He's going to challenge the filing. Let him challenge it, she said. He'll be challenging a territorial law in front of a federal jurisdiction that outranks Harold Birch. She rolled the survey carefully and put it back in the satchel. And tomorrow, in front of every rancher in this valley, I'm going to make very sure everyone understands exactly what he's been doing. Martha set a plate of food on the table that no one touched. Nate looked at Clara for a long moment. You've been planning this since Monday morning, he said, when you stood in front of that fence. I've been planning it since I found Robert's file about the 1868 survey dispute, she said. I just needed Eli to bring me the piece that made it whole. Something moved in Nate's expression that she chose not to name. What do you need me to do tomorrow? He asked. Sit beside me, she said. And don't speak unless I ask you to. Whatever Maddox says about us, and he will say, it let me answer it. Clara. Nate. She looked at him directly. I need this to be my fight. Not because I don't trust you, because if you fight it, it's a land dispute between two ranchers. If I fight it, she paused. It becomes something else, something bigger. He held her gaze, then nodded once. All right, he said. Your fight. The Wyoming Cattlemen's Association met in the Laramie County Hall, a long room with plain walls and hard chairs and a standing capacity of about 80 people. Thursday morning, every chair was full before 8 o'clock. Clara had known it would be. Maddox had made sure of it. He'd spent the week sending word to every association member that there was a matter of serious concern to be raised a widow woman and her business partner making claims on shared water resources, a situation that required the membership's collective attention. He had arranged his own audience. She intended to use it. She walked in with Nate on her left, Tom Briggs on her right, and Walt Henderson and Jim Billings directly behind her. She had spoken to 8 ranchers in the past 3 days. 6 of them were in the room this morning. She sat down in the 3rd row. Not the back, she was not hiding. Not the front, she was not performing. The 3rd row, where a woman sits when she is there to do business. Maddox was at the front standing beside the association chair, a broad man named Cecil Watts, who had the look of someone who had spent 48 hours being pressured from 2 directions and had not slept well because of it. The meeting opened. Watts managed the formal business with the focused efficiency of a man who wants to get to the hard part and get it over with. Then he cleared his throat. We have a matter brought forward by Mr. Grant Maddox regarding a water rights dispute affecting several association members, he said. Mr. Maddox, the floor is yours. Maddox stood. He was a big man well dressed with the easy confidence of someone who had won enough rooms that walking into one felt like returning home. He looked around with the measured calm of a man who has already counted his votes. Thank you, Cecil. He let the room settle. I'll be brief. The Double M has filed a legitimate legal claim on water rights in the East Valley Corridor. This claim is backed by a preliminary court order from Judge Birch. It's a property matter, and under normal circumstances, I'd handle it privately. He paused, letting that pause do its work. But circumstances have become less than normal. He looked at Clara. Mrs. Clara Whitmore and Mr. Nathaniel Callahan have been conducting a relationship that has clouded their judgment about what belongs to them and what does not. They have made legal filings designed to circumvent a legitimate court order. And I believe the association membership deserves to know that what presents itself as a neighbor dispute is in fact a coordinated attempt by two people to use romantic entanglement to claim water resources that are not theirs. The room was very quiet. Clara felt every eye move to her. She kept her face still. Maddox reached inside his coat. Furthermore, I have here a document signed by Henry Dawson, the previous owner of Red Mesa Ranch, dated October 1874, ceding his personal spring access rights to the Double M Ranch in exchange for debt relief. He held up the letter. This predates Mr. Callahan's purchase of Red Mesa. The spring rights were never Callahan's to sell or share. He set the document on the table in front of Watts with the deliberate care of a man placing a winning card. "Now," he said, looking directly at Clara. "I understand Mrs. Whitmore is in a difficult financial position. I understand she has formed an attachment to her neighbor. I have no interest in humiliating a widow. But I will not surrender a legal right because the alternative is inconvenient to someone's feelings," murmuring in the room. Clara could feel the tide shifting the way a room moves when it has been given a story it wants to believe. Watts cleared his throat. "Thank you, Mr. Maddox. Is there a response?" Clara stood up. Watts blinked. "Mrs. Whitmore, I hadn't—" "I'll be brief," she said. She had borrowed his opening word deliberately, and several people in the room noticed. "Mr. Maddox says he has a letter signed by Henry Dawson dated October 1874. "That's correct," Maddox said. "Henry Dawson died in July of 1874, she said. "I have his death record from the county clerk's office." She reached into the satchel at her feet and held up the document. "Signed by Dr. Peter Ames on July 14, 1874. Mr. Dawson could not have signed anything in October of that year." She let the room absorb that. "Mr. Maddox's letter is a forgery." Dead silence. Maddox's expression did not collapse. He was too experienced for that. But something tightened around his eyes. "That record," he started, "is on file at the county clerk's office and has been there since July of 1874, she said. "I have the clerk's certification of authenticity dated 2 days ago." She put it on the table beside Dawson's fake letter. Then she reached into the satchel again. "I also have the original 1867 territorial survey from the state records in Cheyenne, which shows the spring in question is registered as community water access under the Territorial Water Rights Act of 1864. She held it up. "Which means it cannot be privately claimed by any party including Mr. Maddox, including myself, including Mr. Callahan. It is community water, and it has been community water since before any of us built a fence in this valley." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "Furthermore," she said, "I have here the registered filing stamped by the county clerk at 6:52 Wednesday evening, reactivating the community water claim under the 1864 Act." She placed that document on the table. "Judge Birch's preliminary order applies to private water rights. There are no private water rights to claim. His order is without legal standing." The room had gone completely still. Then she turned slowly to face the full assembly. "I want to say one more thing," she said. "Not about the law, about this valley." She looked at Walt Henderson in the fourth row. 2 years ago, Walt Henderson's creek access was cut off after Maddox bought the upstream land. Walt stayed quiet because he was afraid. She looked at Jim Billings. Jim Billings sold his east quarter at half price after a year of cut fences and frightened cattle. He stayed quiet because he had children to feed. She looked across the room. The widow Crane sold her water rights for $200 because no one told her she had a right to refuse. She paused. "I am telling you this now because Mr. Maddox said this is about my feelings and my financial position. It is not. It is about what happens in this valley when a powerful man decides that water is leverage and silence is consent. She let that land. If he can fence a widow's spring today behind a forged letter and a purchased judge, then every man and woman in this room is next. That is not a threat. It is a pattern. And patterns end when people stop being quiet. Watts was staring at her. The room was staring at her. And then Margaret Halley in the second row put both hands on her knees and stood up. "I move," she said in the tone of a woman who has been waiting for the right moment for a long time, "that the Association formally request a federal review of the preliminary court order issued by Judge Birch, and that we collectively file a friend of court statement supporting the 1864 territorial water rights claim." "Second," said Walt Henderson. He said it loudly. "Third," said Jim Billings. The vote was 27-4. Maddox did not vote. He stood at the front of the room with a stillness that was not calm. It was the stillness of a man doing arithmetic in his head and not liking the answer. He looked at Clara as the vote was counted. She looked back at him without blinking. "This isn't finished," he said quietly enough that only she and Nate and Cecil Watts could hear it. "No," she agreed. "It isn't, but it's changed." He moved that night. She had expected him to. A man like Maddox cornered in public doesn't retreat, he reloads. She had been thinking about what he would do next since before the vote was finished, and there was really only one option left to him. If the legal path was closing, he would try to destroy the physical evidence. The spring itself, the access markers, the survey stakes that established the community water boundary. If the markers were gone, the 1864 filing would be disputed. It would take months to resurvey. In that time, the drought would deepen, cattle would die, and financial pressure would do what legal pressure hadn't. She had sent Eli to the spring at dusk with instructions. Eli and Tom Briggs and Sheriff Amos Reed, who had been reached by Clara at 4 in the afternoon, and shown every document in the satchel, and who had sat very still for a long time reading them, and then said quietly that he'd been waiting for someone to bring him something solid enough to stand on. She and Nate rode out to the spring at midnight. They heard the voices before they saw the lanterns. Maddox's men, 3 of them, including Holt, were pulling the survey stakes, working fast and quietly in the summer dark. They were almost finished when Sheriff Reed stepped out of the shadow by the tree line with a lantern in one hand and a deputy's badge on the man beside him, and the flat-carrying voice of a lawman who is not asking. "Drop what you're holding," Reed said. "Hands where I can see them." Holt froze. "I said drop it." The stakes fell. Clara and Nate came forward into the lantern light. Holt looked at her with the look of a man who has just understood exactly how thoroughly he has been set up and is trying to decide who to be angry at. "Mrs. Whitmore," Reed said without looking away from Holt. "The evidence you need. The men removing the markers are witnesses to the fact that someone considered them significant enough to destroy," she said. "And the destruction of community water boundary markers is a criminal offense under the 1864 Act, which means this is no longer a civil matter." Reed looked at Holt. "You ride for Maddox." Holt said nothing. "That'll be noted," Reed said. "Deputy, get their names." Nate stood beside Clara in the dark and said nothing. He had promised her he would let her fight it. He had kept that promise through the meeting, through the voting, through every word Maddox had said about the 2 of them in that room. And now he stood at the spring at midnight, with the summer sky enormous and clear overhead, and watched her finish what she'd started, and he didn't say a single word. Because he'd promised. And because she hadn't needed him to say anything. When Reed had finished with his deputy and had Maddox's men in hand, he turned to Clara. "I'll need your full statement in the morning," he said. "All of it. The forged letter, the altered county record, the judge. All of it." He paused. "This is going to go to federal jurisdiction." "I know," she said. "I'll be at your office at 8. He tipped his hat, moved his prisoner south. "Kahua." And then it was just Clara and Nate, and the spring running quiet and steady in the dark, the way it had been running since before any of them existed, before the fences and the deeds and the men who thought water could be owned. Nate looked at the spring for a moment. Then he looked at her. "You sent Eli to get Reed this afternoon," he said, before the meeting was even over. "I sent Eli during this meeting," she said, "during Maddox's opening. I knew what he'd do tonight the moment I saw his face when the vote was called." Nate shook his head slowly. "You outworked him at every step." "I had better reasons," she said simply. They stood there for a moment in the summer dark, and the spring ran between them, and everything that had been unsaid for 11 years sat in the air alongside everything that had been done in the last 3 weeks, and the weight of both of it was in that specific moment not heavy at all. "Clara," he said. "Don't," she said quietly. "Not tonight. Tonight let it just be this." He was quiet. The spring ran. The stars hung enormous and indifferent overhead. And for the first time in longer than she could clearly remember, Clara Whitmore stood on her own ground with clean water running at her feet and no weight pressing down on her chest, and let herself breathe all the way in. Sheriff Reed's office at 8 in the morning was already full when Clara arrived. She had expected maybe the sheriff, his deputy, and a county recorder. What she found was Reed, his deputy, a man she didn't recognize in a dark coat, who introduced himself as a federal land investigator out of Cheyenne, and Daniel Pruitt. Her attorney, who had apparently been there since 7 and had the careful, energized look of a lawyer who has realized the case is bigger than he originally understood. "Mrs. Whitmore," the federal man said. His name was Garrett. He had the flat, efficient voice of someone who traveled a lot and had stopped being impressed by local drama a long time ago. "Your filing under the 1864 Act triggered a territorial review. We received it in Cheyenne yesterday afternoon." "That was fast," she said. "Altered county records and a forged deed document from a dead man tends to move things quickly," he said. "Judge Birch has already recused himself pending an ethics review. His preliminary order is voided as of this morning." Clara sat down. "The fence Maddox put on the spring corridor," she said. "Is it coming down today?" "My deputy is out there now," Reed said. She nodded. She kept her face neutral. She had learned over the past 3 weeks to hold good news the same way she held bad news level measured without letting it move her before she'd thought through what it meant. "What do you need from me?" Garrett opened his notebook. "Everything," he said. "From the beginning. Take your time." She took 2 hours. She told it all: the dry wells, the horse purchase, the spring access agreement, the altered county survey, the forged Dawson letter, Holt at the fence line every morning, the social council maneuver, the cattlemen's meeting, midnight at the spring. She told it in order without editorializing, and she put a document on the table for every claim she made. Garrett wrote steadily. When she finished, he looked up. "The man Callahan," he said. "Your business partner." "Yes. His deed to Red Mesa will need to review the original purchase documentation. If the county survey was altered before his purchase, his deed may have been recorded against false boundary information." "What does that mean for his ownership?" she asked carefully. "It means we verify the original boundaries and refile. His ownership itself isn't in question. The land was legitimately sold by Dawson's estate. It's the boundary description that needs correcting." He paused. "It'll take 6 to 8 weeks." "I understand." She rode home with the particular kind of tired that comes not from physical labor, but from sustained precision, from holding everything exactly right for exactly long enough. She was almost at the Whitmore gate when she heard a horse coming up from the south at a walk. Not Nate's horse, not Tom's. A big gray she didn't recognize. Grant Maddox pulled up alongside her and stopped. She kept Sage walking. He turned the gray and fell in beside her, which she hadn't expected. She'd expected lawyers. She'd expected a messenger. She had not expected the man himself alone on a quiet morning road riding at her pace. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said. "Mr. Maddox." She kept her eyes forward. "Your men are in federal custody. Your preliminary order is voided. Your attorney should be filing papers on your behalf somewhere other than here. He is, Maddox said. That's handled. He was quiet for a moment. I didn't come to negotiate. Then what did you come for? He was quiet again, long enough that she glanced at him. He was looking at the road ahead, and his face had something in it she hadn't seen there before. Not remorse exactly. Something older than remorse. My wife, he said, spent the last year of her life trying to save a ranch that was already gone. She didn't tell me how bad the debt was until 3 months before the bank took it. She was trying to protect me from worrying. He said it without affect, the way a man recites a thing he has recited to himself many times. She died that winter. Fever. We'd lost the ranch in September, and she was already sick, and I think... He stopped. I think losing the land took something out of her she didn't have to spare. Clara said nothing. I bought my first property 6 months later, he said. Cash. And I kept buying. Because land was the one thing I could understand. The one thing that didn't leave if you held it tight enough. He looked at her briefly. I'm not telling you that excuses anything. No, she said. It doesn't. I know. He pulled the gray to a stop. She kept sage walking, and he let her go. For what it's worth, he said at her back, you fought it clean. That's more than I did. She didn't answer that. She rode through the gate. She sat with that conversation for 2 days before she told anyone about it. Not because it changed what Maddox had done. It didn't. But because it reminded her that the man she'd been fighting was also somewhere underneath the damage he'd caused a person who had started from a loss, the same kind of loss that could hollow a person out if they let it. She had not let it hollow her. She had rebuilt instead. She thought it was worth knowing the difference. Nate came by on a Saturday morning with a rolled document under his arm and stopped at the kitchen door rather than coming in, which was unusual enough that Martha looked up from the stove and then quietly took her coffee to another room. Come in, Clara said. He came in. He sat down across from her and set the rolled document on the table between them, but didn't open it. He looked at her for a moment. The federal investigator came to Red Mesa Thursday, he said. We went through everything. The deed's clean, the land is mine, the sale was legitimate. Garrett's refiling the corrected boundary description with the territorial office. Good. The spring corridor has been formally designated community water access. Both our properties have documented rights to it. So does every other ranch in the valley. He paused. Henderson went to Garrett's office Friday morning. Billings went Friday afternoon. 6 other ranchers are scheduled next week. Maddox is finished in this valley, Clara said. Yes. He looked at the document between them. I want to talk to you about something else. All right. He didn't speak immediately. Nate Callahan, who had always chosen his words like he chose his footing carefully, one at a time, seemed for the first time since she'd ridden back into his yard, not sure where to put his foot next. The road access you gave me, he said finally. And the spring arrangement, the way we worked this month. He looked at her. It worked, Clara. Not just the legal fight. The way we worked together. You handled what I couldn't handle, the room, the evidence, the patience, and I backed you without getting in the way. We didn't duplicate each other, we covered ground. Yes, she said, we did. I'd like to keep doing that. He reached forward and unrolled the document. It was a hand-drawn map of both properties, her east acres, his west range, the spring corridor running between them, the road access marked in clean lines. I had this drawn up 3 days ago. I've been deciding whether to show it to you for 3 days. She looked at it. At the 2 properties side by side, the way they sat naturally, the spring between them like a seam. What are you proposing? She asked. A merger, he said. Legal, formal, both properties under a single brand, jointly owned, jointly operated. He met her eyes. And I'm asking you to marry me. Not because it solves anything. Not because I want to take care of you, because I've spent enough time watching you this month to know that would be insulting to both of us. He paused. Because I think we are better at this, at all of it together, and I am tired of wasting years. Clara looked at the map for a long moment. Then she looked at him. If I say yes, she said, I need you to understand what that means. It is not your ranch with my name added. It is not my ranch under your protection. It is two properties and two people with equal say in every decision: the money, the workers, the cattle, the land, the debt, the future. Equal, legal, in writing. Yes, he said. When we disagree, and we will disagree. Nate, we have disagreed consistently for 23 years. We have, he said, and almost smiled. When we disagree, we work it out between us before it becomes Tom's problem, or Martha's problem, or the hand's problem. We don't go around each other. Agreed. And if there are letters, she said, or conversations, or decisions that affect both of us, you bring them to me. Not after. Not when you've already decided. You bring them to me first. He held her gaze. She watched him understand exactly what she was saying, not just a condition for marriage, but an accounting for 11 years delivered without drama, without accusation, as a statement of what she required going forward. Yes, he said. I will. She looked at the map one more time. Then she folded her hands on the table. Then yes, she said. It was a quiet yes. Not breathless, not tearful. The yes of a woman who has done the arithmetic and found it sound. He looked at her with the eyes she'd known since she was 20 years old, and what was in them was not triumph and was not relief. It was something simpler and more durable than either. All right, he said. All right, she said. Martha appeared in the kitchen doorway with a second coffee cup and the expression of a woman who had been listening through a door and had decided that pretending otherwise was beneath her dignity. Well, she said, setting the cup in front of Nate. It only took 11 years and a water war. They told no one until the papers were drawn. Clara hired a different attorney for the merger, a woman named Ruth Alcott out of Cheyenne, whom Daniel Pruitt recommended with the slightly deflated air of a man acknowledging a better option. Ruth Alcott arrived on a Tuesday, reviewed every document on both properties in a single afternoon, asked questions that nobody had thought to ask, and produced a merger agreement by Thursday that Clara read 3 times and found fair in every line. She and Nate signed on a Friday. They married the following Monday at the county clerk's office with Martha and Eli and Tom Briggs as witnesses, and Margaret Halley, who had shown up uninvited at 8 in the morning, and whom no one had the nerve to send home. No celebration, no announcement, no performance. On the way out of the clerk's office, Eli held the door, and Tom Briggs shook Nate's hand and said, "Been wondering when this was going to happen, sir," without a trace of irony. Nate laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that starts low and means something. Clara hadn't heard him laugh like that in 23 years, and it landed somewhere in her chest and stayed there. Martha drove them home in the wagon and spent the whole ride not talking, which for Martha Bell was a form of sentiment more expressive than most people's tears. The first argument happened 4 days later. It was about the workers. Nate had a hand named Kreider, who had been with him 2 years, and whom Tom Briggs didn't trust. Tom had a hand named Keene, whom Nate thought was too young for the responsibility he'd been given. Both men brought their respective concerns to Clara separately, because both men had known Clara longer, and Clara came to the supper table Thursday night with the information and the specific irritation of a woman who has been put in the middle of something without being asked. "We're not doing this," she said. Nate looked up. "Doing what?" "Tom came to me about Kreider. You've apparently been talking to Eli about Keene. Both of them came to me, instead of talking to each other, because neither of them wants to go directly to you yet, and neither of them wants to cross me, and the result is that I am carrying both conversations instead of the people who should be having them." She set down her fork. "Starting tomorrow, you and Tom sit down together. You talk about both hands, you make a decision together, and you tell me the outcome, not the other way around." Nate looked at her for a moment. "You're right," he said. "I know I'm right." She picked her fork back up. "We said equal. Equal means neither of us gets to be the place where everything stops and starts." He nodded. He looked at his plate. Then he looked back up. "Can I say one thing?" Yes. You're going to be the one people bring things to, he said. For a while, maybe for a long time. Because you're the one who stood in that meeting and fought for the valley. You earned that, and it's going to mean people trust you in a way they have to learn to trust me. He held her eyes. I'm not going to pretend that's not true. But I'm also not going to let it become a structure where you carry things alone. So, if it happens, I'll tell you, she said. And I expect you to actually hear it. I will, he said. I promise you I will. They finished supper. The evening settled around the kitchen, the way evenings do when the day's hard edge has been worked through, and what remains is the ordinary substance of two people who have chosen to occupy the same life. Martha cleaned up without being asked. Outside, Tom's voice carried from the bunkhouse easy and low. The summer dark came in warm through the open window. We need a name, Clara said. Nate looked up from the ledger he'd been working through. For the ranch. We can't call it Whitmore. We can't call it Callahan. The hands are going to need to know what brand they're writing for by fall. She looked at the map on the table, the joint property map that lived on the kitchen table now, because they consulted it often enough that putting it away was impractical. I've been thinking about the broken star. He was quiet for a moment. Broken star. A star that's cracked still gives light, she said. It still guides. It's just honest about what it is. She looked at him. We've both been broken in places. The ranch was broken. The spring was fought for. I don't want a name that pretends otherwise. He looked at the map. At the two properties drawn side by side, the spring running between them. The Broken Star Ranch, he said. Yes. He nodded slowly. Yes, he said. That's right. She wrote it at the top of the map in her clean, precise hand. Then she slid the map back to the center of the table so they could both see it. The account books took longer than anything else. She'd known Robert's finances were strained, that wasn't a surprise. But when she and Nate sat down in the second week of September to consolidate the two ranch ledgers into a single operating account, she found a notation in Robert's oldest records that stopped her hand on the page. A note. A promissory note held by the Wyoming Land and Cattle Bank, the banking arm of Grant Maddox's operation, dated 1871. $12,000 borrowed against the Whitmore East Range. Interest paid annually. Principal not yet retired. She stared at it. She checked the payment records. Robert had paid the interest every year quietly without telling her. He had never missed a payment. He had never told her the note existed. Nate, she said. He came to look over her shoulder. She heard his breathing change. Maddox held a note on your property, he said, for 3 years before any of this started. He never called it in, she said, not once. Even when he was pressuring me, even when he was running his men past my fence line every morning, he never called in the note. She sat very still. Because if he'd called the note and forced a sale, he'd only have gotten the East Range. He wanted the whole valley. He wanted the spring corridor. He wanted... She stopped. He was waiting for me to fail on my own. And when I didn't fail, when I found a way to keep going, when I formed a legal partnership with you that protected the spring, he had to come at you directly. Nate finished. And he lost. She looked at the note for a long moment. He held this for 3 years and never used it, and he still lost. Nate set his hand on the table near hers. Not touching, near. What do you want to do with the note? He asked. Pay it off, she said. This month, in full. I want his name off this property in every form it exists. We have enough in the combined account. She checked the numbers. If we delay the south fence repair until spring, yes. Delay the south fence, he said immediately. She looked at him. The south fence can wait, he said. Maddox's name can't. She allowed herself one moment of something that was not quite a smile, and was not quite relief, and was entirely her own. Then she turned back to the ledger. I'll send the payment Monday, she said. I'll ride with you, he said. It's one bank visit, Nate. I know. I'll still ride with you. She didn't argue. They worked the ledgers until the lamp burned low side by side at the kitchen table, going through 12 years of separate accounting line by line and building something unified out of it. And when they finally closed the books, it was past midnight, and the summer air was cool through the window for the first time in months. Clara gathered the papers and squared them neatly and set them in order for Monday. Nate watched her. "Are you all right?" he asked. She considered the question seriously, the way she considered everything. The note, the 3 years Robert had kept that secret, the price of silence paid by more than one person in more than one way. "Yes," she said, and meant it. "I'm all right." He nodded. She put out the lamp. The Broken Star Ranch settled into the dark around them, and whatever it had been before, two separate struggling properties, two broken people pointing away from each other, it was something else now. Not fixed, not finished, not easy, but standing. And that Clara Whitmore had learned was enough to build from. The first winter nearly broke them. Not Maddox, not a judge, not a forged document or a hired gun. The first winter nearly broke the Broken Star Ranch, the way most things break quietly from the inside, through the accumulated weight of ordinary hardship hitting at the wrong time. December came in savage. A blizzard in the second week buried the south pasture for 10 days and killed 19 head of cattle before the temperature climbed enough to dig them out. The north barn roof cracked under the snow weight and had to be shored up in 30 below wind, while Clara held a lantern and Nate and Tom and Eli worked with boards and rope and language that Martha said she did not hear and nobody believed. 2 of the younger hands quit in January, scared off by the cold, which left everyone else covering their work without additional pay, which created the kind of slow friction that never announces itself, but shows up in tone of voice and dropped tools, and men going to bed tired and getting up still tired, and the banknote. Not Maddox's note that was paid and gone. But the Broken Star carried operating debt from the merger, from the legal fees, from the storm damage, and from $12,000 in back-end consolidation costs that Ruth Alcott had been upfront about, and which had seemed manageable in September and felt considerably less manageable by February. Clara and Nate sat at the kitchen table on a Thursday in the second week of February and looked at the ledger and said nothing for a long time. "We can sell the East Haystock," Nate said finally. "We won't need it for planting if we reduce the herd size for spring. If we reduce the herd, we lose yield in fall." Clara looked at the numbers, and fall yield is what services the operating debt. She traced a column of figures with her finger. "We don't reduce the herd." Then the haystock. "That's $900. It gets us to March. We need to get to November." She sat back. "What about the Hendersons? Walt said last fall he was looking to expand his horse operation. We have 6 horses we haven't been able to sell because the market softened. $400 per horse if we're lucky in this market. $2,400, combined with the haystock, that's $3,300. That covers the operating debt service through July." She looked at him. "If summer is mild and the cattle gain well." "If," he said. "Everything is if," she said. "That's ranching." He looked at the ledger, then at her. "Let me call on Henderson Monday." "I'll come with you," she said. "Clara, it's a horse sale, not a, I know what it is." She met his eyes. "I said I'll come." He understood. This was not about the horses. This was about 2 people learning in real time that equal partnership in good weather was easy, and equal partnership in a hard February was the thing that actually counted. "Monday," he said. 7 in the morning. 6:30, she said. "The roads are better before the melt starts." He almost smiled. 6:30. They sold the horses. They sold the haystock. They made it to March, and then to May, and then to July. And then in a fall that turned out mild and long and generous, the cattle came in heavy, and the Broken Star met its debt service with 3 weeks to spare. Clara wrote the payment figure in the ledger in her clean hand, and then sat looking at it for a moment before she closed the book. Nate came into the kitchen and looked at her face and said, "Done. Done," she said. He poured 2 cups of coffee. He set one in front of her. He sat down, They drank their coffee. That was all. That was enough. The letter from Grant Maddox arrived in the spring of the ranch's second year. Not from his attorney, not from a bank. A personal letter in his own hand addressed to Clara Callahan in writing that was noticeably shakier than the man she remembered standing in front of the Cattlemen's Association with his careful confidence intact. She read the return address twice before she opened it. He was dying. He said so plainly in the first sentence, with the bluntness of a man who had stopped having time for soft approaches. Liver. He had perhaps 6 months which the doctor had told him in October, and which he had spent, he wrote, in an uncharacteristic process of accounting. He was not apologizing. He said that plainly, too. What he had done for reasons he understood, and apology felt dishonest at this distance. But there was something he thought she should have, and he was sending it now because 6 months was not long, and he didn't want to die with it in his possession. It was a letter inside the letter, folded separately, written in a woman's hand, his wife's hand. Clara read it at the kitchen table alone, because she had been alone when it arrived and she didn't wait for Nate. It was a single page, undated, written by a woman named Eleanor Maddox sometime in the last year of her life. It was not addressed to anyone. It read like something written to herself. Eleanor wrote about the ranch they'd lost, about the way she'd watched it go, without fighting, the way she'd accepted each step of the losing as inevitable, because no one had ever told her she had the right to fight a bank. She wrote that she had been afraid of being seen as difficult, as grasping, as unwomanly. She wrote that she had watched her husband grieve a loss she might have helped prevent if she'd understood sooner that her name on the deed meant something. She wrote, "I wish I had known that a woman on her own land has the right to stand on it." Clara read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and put it in the tin box with the old letter from Nate. When Nate came in that evening, she told him about the Maddox letter. She told him about Eleanor. She told him what Eleanor had written. She didn't show him the letter itself that felt private in a way she couldn't quite articulate, but she told him the substance of it. Nate listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "She never knew what she could have done," he said. "No," Clara said. "She didn't." He looked at her across the table. "You did." "I had Martha," she said. "And I had you. And I had the valley angry enough to stand up. Eleanor had none of that." She paused. "That's the difference. Not courage. Infrastructure." He looked at her steadily. "That's what you're building," he said. "Isn't it?" She didn't answer right away, because she hadn't named it yet, hadn't put words to the thing she'd been doing quietly for 2 months since the cattlemen's meeting had spread through the valley, and the Federal Review had made the newspaper in Cheyenne, and 3 women she'd never met had written to ask her for advice about their own water disputes. "I'm going to answer the letters," she said. "The ones from the other women. I'm going to answer all of them." Nate nodded. "And if they need to come here," she said, "I'm going to let them." "All right," he said. "It'll be time I'm not spending on the ranch." "I know. You might have to cover—" "Clara." He said her name quietly. "Answer the letters." Eli Turner got married in the summer of the ranch's 3rd year to a schoolteacher from Laramie named Rose, who had strong opinions about bookkeeping and a laugh that carried across the yard on a still day. Clara stood beside Nate at the small ceremony and watched the boy who had chased her to the fence line to tell her that Nate got up earlier since he heard her name, that boy standing straight-backed and certain in his good suit, putting a ring on a woman's hand, and felt the particular kind of joy that comes from watching someone young step fully into their own life. At the reception, Eli found her near the fence where the dancing wasn't quite so loud. "Mrs. Callahan," he said. He still called her that sometimes on formal occasions, though she'd told him Clara was fine. "I want to say something." "Then say it." "That first day," he said, "when you rode in and cut the stallion off before he hit me." He paused. "I thought you were the bravest person I'd ever seen. I still think that." Clara looked at this young man who was no longer quite so young. "You weren't afraid?" he said. "You just acted." "I was afraid," she said. I was afraid every single day for the better part of 2 years. She looked at him steadily. That's not what bravery is, Eli. Bravery is being afraid and doing it anyway, and then getting up the next morning and doing it again. That's the whole of it. He thought about that. Yes, ma'am, he said. Go dance with your wife, she said. He went. Nate collapsed on a Tuesday in August the 4th summer. Not dramatically. Not in a field with witnesses. He was in the equipment shed going over the wheel repair on the supply wagon, and he sat down on a crate because he felt dizzy, and then he didn't get up, and Tom Briggs found him there 20 minutes later and came for Clara at a run. It was his heart. Not a failure, the doctor said that carefully, watching Clara's face, not a failure, but a warning. Strain accumulated over years of hard physical labor, made worse by the summer heat and a work schedule that a man of 37 could maintain and a man of 49 could not. He would need rest. Weeks of it. He would need to change how he worked. He would need to accept help. Clara sat beside his bed that first evening while he slept, and she did something she had not done in a very long time. She let herself be afraid. Not managed fear. Not productive fear channeled into action. Plain, honest, cold fear. The kind that comes when you realize that the thing you have rebuilt your life around is not permanent. That the person sitting across the kitchen table from you is mortal. In the same way, you are mortal, and the equation has a fixed ending that neither of you gets to negotiate. She sat with that for a long time. When he woke, it was dark and the lamp was low. How long was I asleep? He asked. 5 hours. You've been here the whole time. Yes. He looked at her face. He was quiet for a moment. Are you all right? No, she said. He reached out and took her hand. She let him. She held on in a way she had not let herself hold on to anything in a very long time. Not practically, not strategically, not with one part of her mind already planning the next move. Just held on. I'm not finished, he said. I want you to know that. I know. We have a lot of years left. I know that too. She looked at him in the low light. I just needed a moment to be afraid of the alternative. That's fair, he said quietly. It passes, she said. The fear. I know how to work through it. I know you do. His hand tightened on hers. But you don't have to work through it tonight. She didn't. She sat beside him until he fell back asleep, and she didn't move, and she didn't plan, and she didn't organize or prepare or account for anything. She just stayed. That, she understood later, was the thing she had needed to learn. Not how to fight. Not how to build. How to stay when there was nothing to do but stay and let that be enough. He recovered. Slowly, with the impatience of a man who has spent his whole life moving and is poorly suited to stillness. He drove Martha to distraction. He drove the hands to quiet amusement. He drove Clara to a conversation in the 3rd week of his recovery, where she sat on the edge of his bed and told him plainly that if he got up and went to the south pasture one more time before the doctor cleared him, she would personally put a lock on the shed door. You can't lock me in my own shed, he said. I can and I will, she said. Equal partnership means equal responsibility for your own health, Nate. You don't get to scare me like that and then ignore the doctor because you're bored. He looked at her. I was scared, she said. It came out simply. I am still scared. And I need you to take this seriously because I am not willing to lose you to a wagon wheel repair. He was quiet for a moment. All right, he said, quietly, meaning it. Thank you, she said. She stood up to go. Clara. His voice stopped her at the door. I was scared too. I want you to know that. Not of dying, of leaving you with the ranch alone again. He paused. Of putting you back where you were when this started. She turned around and looked at him. That would not break me, she said. I know. But I am very glad it isn't happening." "So am I," he said. "So am I." They came on a Wednesday morning in the 7th year of the Broken Star. Two young women on horseback arriving at the gate with their hats in their hands, and a letter of introduction written by the widow Crane, who had reclaimed her water rights 2 years after the federal review, and who had since become the kind of neighbor people consulted before they made a decision. The younger of the two women was 19. The older was 24. They were sisters, and they had inherited their father's land claim the previous winter, and they did not know how to read a survey map, negotiate a water agreement, manage a creditor, or fire a hand who was stealing from the feed supply. They had heard that Clara Callahan at the Broken Star knew how. Clara was at the east fence when Tom came to find her. She rode back to the gate and looked at these two young women and felt something move through her that she didn't immediately have a name for. Then she did. Recognition. "Come in," she said. "Have you eaten?" "No, ma'am," said the older one. "We rode since first light." "Then come eat first. Everything else after." They ate at the kitchen table, where 11 years of decisions had been made, and then Clara spread the valley map and started at the beginning. Survey terminology. Water rights language. What a deed description means and what it doesn't. How to read a banknote. When to consult an attorney and when to handle it yourself, and how to know the difference. Nate came in mid-morning, took one look at the scene, poured himself coffee and sat down at the far end of the table without being asked, listening, adding a word when he had one, and staying quiet when he didn't. The sisters stayed 3 days. When they left, they had survey maps of their own property that they could read, a list of 3 attorneys in the county that Clara trusted, a written outline of the water rights claims available to their specific land, and the kind of straightened posture that comes not from pride, but from competence. They were not the last. Word moved through the valley the way water moves, finding its way through every available channel, arriving at places you didn't expect. More women came. A widow from the North Fork with a fence dispute. A young wife whose husband had left her with a ranch she didn't know how to operate, and a banknote she didn't know she'd signed. A girl of 20 who had inherited from her uncle and been told by 3 separate attorneys that she'd be better off selling, all 3 of whom had buyers ready. Clara taught them all. She taught them the same way she'd learned, not with softness, not with false reassurance, but with honest information delivered straight, and then followed by the question, "What do you want to do with it?" Because that was the part no one had taught her either. The assumption that wanting something wasn't enough. That wanting land, wanting independence, wanting to build something that lasted required permission from someone else. It didn't. It required work. It required patience and evidence and allies, and the willingness to stand in a room full of people who had already decided against you and say what needed to be said anyway. But it did not require permission. She told them that too. Nate watched this happen around him with the expression of a man who is not surprised but is consistently impressed. One evening he sat across from her after the latest visitor had ridden out and said, "You know this is going to become something official." "I know. People are going to want to formalize it, name it." "I know." She looked at the map on the table, the same map that had been there since the merger, the broken star drawn in her hand. "I'm not interested in naming it. I'm interested in it working." "It's working," he said. "Not well enough." She looked up at him. The widow Crane almost lost her land because she didn't know what she didn't know. That's not a problem you fix with one conversation. It has to be ongoing, consistent, available. She paused. "I want to put it in writing, what I teach, so that if something happens to me, the information doesn't go with me." He looked at her steadily. "Then write it," he said. "It'll take time I could be spending on the ranch." "Clara." He said her name the way he'd learned to say it over 7 years, not as a redirect, not as a correction, as a full stop followed by an open door. "Write it." She wrote it. Martha Bell died in the October of the 8th year, in her own bed in the room she had occupied in the Whitmore house since before Clara's marriage to Robert, with Clara holding one hand, and the morning coming in quiet through the window. She had been slowing since spring. She had said with characteristic directness that she was not going to make a production of it, and she didn't want any fuss, and she had meant it, and Clara had honored it, and the fuss she didn't make was the most Martha-like thing about her departure. In the last week, when the days were short and clear and cold, Martha had taken Clara's hand and said, "You know what you are now." "Tell me anyway," Clara said. Martha looked at her with those steady dark eyes. "You are what Eleanor Maddox wished she had been," she said. "And you are what every woman riding onto this ranch is trying to become. And you did it without surrendering one single thing that was yours." She paused. "I want you to know I have been proud of you since you were 20 years old. Even the years I was also furious with you." "Especially those years," Clara said. "Especially those," Martha agreed. She died before noon. Clara sat with her for a long time after. Nate came in and sat on the other side of the bed without a word, and they stayed there together until the light changed, and what passed between them in that room was too quiet and too complete for language. 11 years after the water war, on a Wednesday morning in July, that came in the same way that first summer had, hot and flat and wide and promising nothing and threatening nothing and simply arriving the way time does. Clara Callahan stood at the Broken Star Gate and watched 3 young women ride up the road. She didn't know their names yet. She would by noon. Nate came up beside her. He moved a little more carefully than he once had, and the gray at his temples had spread considerably, and there were days when his shoulder gave him trouble from an old injury that hadn't healed quite right. He stood beside her and looked at the riders coming and said nothing. "I keep thinking," she said about that first morning, riding to Red Mesa with a loaded rifle and $47 and nothing left to try. "And 6 horses to buy," he said. "And 6 horses to buy." She looked at him. "You looked exactly the same." "You look terrifying," he said. "Good," she said. "That was the point." He laughed low and real and entirely familiar after 11 years of mornings and arguments and ledgers and storms and the ordinary, extraordinary labor of building something together. She had heard that laugh 10,000 times, and it still landed in the same place. The riders reached the gate. Clara straightened, took one breath of the hot summer air, and walked forward to meet them. Because once she had ridden into Red Mesa Ranch with empty wells and a failing ranch, and a grief she hadn't finished processing, and she had found the man she'd lost, and a war she hadn't chosen, and a valley that needed someone willing to stand in a room and say the thing that everyone else was afraid to say. And she had stood, and she had built, and she had not once, not in 11 years of drought and debt and love and loss, surrendered a single thing that was hers. That was the broken star. That was what 2 people could make when they chose each other not out of desperation or nostalgia or rescue, but out of the clear-eyed, daily difficult decision to build something larger than either of them alone. Love is not the absence of hardship. Love is what you build when hardship gives you every reason to walk away, and you look at the person beside you and decide again to stay.